The raven's call. The old well-worn woman had finished her sandwich, which had been prepared by the loving and well-worn hands of her husband, and she was sitting quietly waiting for it to digest. For her digestion was not what it once was, and eating such things as sandwiches left her, and her digestion left her a little sleepy these days, and she allowed herself to dose a little. She had not for a moment shut her eyes when she was interrupted by a little voice, and she blinked a little before opening her eyes fully to what sat on the branch of her favourite tree. "Well, well, well, what have we got here?" a familiar voice screeched. Gigi focused her eyes as she sat in her rocking chair, which was positioned under her blooming cherry blossom tree. She recognized that voice and remained silent as she stared at the little crow perched on a branch just above her head. "I wasn't expecting to find you here." The raven's wings flapped. "There is trouble coming, you know?" Gigi knew better than to respond. It would be too much for the crow not to speak. She knew it to be a chatty and gossipy little raven. He could hardly resist speaking. This too, she knew. "The final trouble? I do not know, but it is a very big trouble indeed." The raven flapped its wings, and its little body shook, as if he felt the dark presence around him. "Ah, ah, ah, ah." He called in his piercing native bird tongue, almost as if in a sign of distress. Then after a moment of this small spectacle, he regained composure, then spoke. "Ah, ah, ah, are you equipped? The new ones aren't, and you're old and past your prime, Gigi. At least that is what the Benacci say. Remember, Gigi, it was you who almost lost the last great war. Ah, ah!" The raven's wings flapped furiously as he spoke, before stilling himself and awaiting Gigi's reply. "You are a wily little thing, Raven." A wry smile and twinkling eyes donned Gigi's face for just a moment. "Have you not heard about blackbirds baked in a pie?" She couldn't resist the tease, and knew it would tame his condescension. The raven flapped around again, giving a much milder distress call than a moment earlier. "Ah, ah, ah," the raven called as he flapped off into the morning sky, and called back to her as he flew. "Gigi, your time is coming sooner than you think." Gigi knew of what he spoke and sighed, as she recalled events past to herself. It had been 33 years since her last venture, this she knew. A lot of damage had happened to her body all of those years before, and she was now in awful shape in her 88th year. That battle had been fierce, and the aching in her bones was a testament to this. Gigi was observing the neighborhood from her little stool under her favorite tree. She looked over her little picket fence, and she watched a woman on a bike cycle by, and recognized it to be the familiar movements of her neighbor of 50 years. Gigi thought of Martha, her dear friend, who had a long-held sprightliness, and who was not quite precisely 2 years Gigi's senior. Martha, bless her, could be seen cycling around the neighborhood and practicing gymnastics routines multiple times a week, and she smiled to herself. Gigi, on the other hand, was most likely spending her time massaging her bones with her homemade ointment and wrapping what she could with bandages to help ease the aches. Today was no exception as she looked down at her strapped knees. To everybody around her in this ordinary world, she appeared to be just another tottery old woman, past her prime and riddled with disease. In this world it was Martha, who was the epitome of older age brilliance, and a person people around these parts aspired to be like. Gigi smiled and thought of Martha as being the beacon of grace and poise in advanced age, and recognizes that she, herself, is happy to be viewed as the tottery old woman who lives in the corner house and sits in the garden under her blossom tree and talks to the flowers. She quite enjoyed being the neighborhood's eccentric quirk. Now that would be a wonderful way to be remembered. Her brown, wrinkled face wrinkled further as it broke into a little smile, and her brown eyes twinkled. Gigi was happy to be thought of as the tottery old eccentric woman with the aches and pains. It helped her not think of her own many wartime battles in ages gone by in Alaysia. So many battles won and lost, none of which this world would ever know, except maybe through fables and stories in eons to come. And even then, the heroine of those stories would most likely resemble very little of Gigi herself. She rubbed her aching knees and thought about that last great fight that the raven had spoken of just now. This war had been the most futile of all of the wars gone by, but it had been the most violent and agitated one she had experienced. Her own wounds were a testament to this. Gigi had broken 2 ribs, one in either cage, broken her right leg in 3 places, her left leg in 2 places, both of her wrists, and also her right shoulder. To endure, her skull was fractured, which had left her unconscious and on the verge of death and life in those ultimate moments of that great battle. This was not to mention the damage to her kidney and lungs from the impact. What was worse than remembering such things was telling her husband John that she was called to battle one more time. This prospect scared her more than facing any dark force, as she recalled his distress as she lay in the hospital, and she remembered feeling his anguish as she recovered, knowing that she would be feeling as he did if their roles were reversed. 8 months in the hospital, and 13 years of operations and rehabilitation, but what managed to bring a tear to her eye, and she remembered the helplessness that was so prevalent in the eye of her beloved John. Gigi shook away these thoughts as she did not want to think of things past, and so this earthen warrior pondered on what the raven had said instead, which was that the new ones weren't equipped. If this was true, these new custodians of the elements probably weren't even aware of their rulerships yet. Though, in her heart, Gigi knew that the Great One had never allowed a war to come to pass without the full training and equipping of his mandated ones. So, she knew the war was soon. She had felt it for a while now, but had chosen to give her instincts no heed. Gigi knew it was coming, but not quite yet. She also knew that the recently mandated ones would have accelerated learning, and this gave her great comfort. Grabbing her old stick, which leaned against the arm of the chair in which she sat, Gigi tapped on the cherry tree trunk 3 times, and then twice, and then 3 times again. Then she waited. The wait, she knew, could be a long one as it had been in the past, but thankfully, this was not the case today. A little golden door appeared, no more than 4 inches high and 3 inches wide, popped open from the base of the tree trunk, and through it popped a little owl-like pixie, no taller than a thumb. "Allura!" Gigi beamed, and she continued to smile as she watched Allura enlarge before her, to a size and height which equaled that of Gigi herself, which was not very tall as Gigi spent most of her days hunched over her walking stick. The pair hugged as Gigi sat, and the two chatted and caught up on all of the woodland gossip Allura told of rigid Rickety Rigby's recent tantrum that had left him skulking around with a vile temper for weeks. She told Gigi of recent engagements and breakups, and even of her own recent exploits of learning to paint and draw, and how she had absolutely no talent for it, despite her teacher's decrees to the contrary. Allura spoke of how she let her teacher keep up the pretense anyway, because it helped Allura stay peaceful and creative, and it gave her joy. Gigi requested to see Allura's handiwork, knowing that it was true that it probably was disastrous. Allura, though graceful and with poise, was a far cry from being an artistic personality. They spoke of many other things for quite a while longer before getting down to the business of the rumours of woes that were surrounding Alaysia. The mood between them grew sombre. Allura told Gigi that the son of Alastor, who was the current Lord of Alaysia, Hindra, was taking over his father's reign and was setting up a new kingdom in the Valley of Huxley. The wise owl noticed Gigi shuddering and knelt on the ground before her, and she placed her hand on Gigi's shoulder, knowing not a lot of comfort could be given for the remembrance of the Valley of Huxley, for this was the place of that last great battle. Allura took a deep breath in. "Hindra has done this for your torment. I am almost certain of it, Gigi. But not only for this reason, but he has also done this because it is the heartbeat of all of Alaysia and the strongest point to draw in the power of the universes. His drive is deeper and darker than that of his father. There is even less light in him, almost none." Allura put her other hand on Gigi's other shoulder, and with her large auburn owl eyes, looked into Gigi's brown ones with deep compassion. "Gigi, my dear one, listen. You know that there are 3 chosen ones being raised up." Allura paused for a moment, still holding Gigi's gaze. 1 for water, 1 for fire, and 1 for wind. But not for soil, Gigi. No one has been called for earth. Allura sucked in a little breath. "It is still your turn. These new ones are young. 1 is still a child, and this battle will be the fiercest and the darkest yet. Hindra is worse than this father, and stronger too, if that were possible." There was no expression but a single tear that ran down Gigi's cheek as she stood heavy-hearted. For even before Allura had spoken, she knew what was to come.